you said that you think that polygamy is necessary for the Black community.
Right.
And tell me why you think that's the case.
I think that polygamy is necessary for the Black community because what it does is it creates a medium for us to restructure the family. Mm-hmm. Most people talk about polygyny, more properly, polygamy, maybe interchanged, as if it's just about wives. And I often say to people that if you went back to any of these places, time immemorial, or 1,000 years ago, or 100 years ago, what have you, and you ask anybody about the whole notion of polygamy, that is, if you said, what do you think about being a polygamist, they'd laugh at you, because the reality is what they were doing is they were engaging in family. Now, to go a little further with that, I think it's necessary for us because what we have to really deal with is the fact that polygamous societies, any of the ones that you look at, produce a certain psycho-emotional and psychosocial culture. Mm-hmm. And that's the important thing. In essence, it produced an environment for people to feel comfortable enough to do it. That's the important thing, not the number of wives, whether someone takes wives, but the environment that allows people to be human enough mm-hmm. to one another to allow them to do it. Okay. We're talking about our humanness, mm-hmm. and that's the thing that's important. So polygamy, I think, in all of the cultures that we might talk about, especially in Africa, was a reflection of the fact that people were practicing at a high level of humanness, okay. And that's important.
All right. So somebody might make the argument, well, then people can practice at the high level of humanness and monogamy. What would you say to that?
I don't think that monogamy, that could be the case, mm-hmm. But I would beg to differ because I think that monogamy in particular brings about a different construct psychologically mm-hmm. to people and emotionally. And one of the things that it does is it divides people immediately, mm-hmm. castigates women, and it makes them compete against each other. And it takes family units or components of families, being nuclear as we use in this culture, and it separates them. So families don't become intentional or extended. That is, they're not full-blown where relationships are created and people have full-blown families and support systems. You have individuals coming together, forming small units, having children who then become disassociated with the centers, their grandparents, their uncles, their aunts. And we've seen throughout history that this just doesn't work. The most effective families are expansive, mm-hmm. and all of the blood relations or people that come into those families can depend upon the people inside of the families. And that's an important thing. And we definitely need that. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that has brought us through as African people in this part of the world anyway. When you go back and you study the history of slavery and what occurred. And it's what we need again. We need to restore that.
Yeah. One of the arguments that I made in terms of why I think that polygamy is necessary is because there's obviously not enough men to go around. We know that the Black men, there's a shortage of men, and we lose a lot of men to incarceration, drug and alcohol addiction. In any event, we just noticed Black men die earlier, we lose more annually than we do women every year, and so we know that we are suffering from a shortage of men. So that's one of the reasons that I kind of made the argument for why we need to practice polygamy.
Right. Let me just say, mm-hmm. people often give these when you say, well, why should we practice polygamy? Mm-hmm. People often give these ideas or propose these things that suggest that there's this necessity mm-hmm. out of a shortage mm-hmm. and out of we have to do something to help us. And even though those things are true, the reality is that I fall back on the notion that it's about creating better human beings. Mm-hmm. If I was to take a person from a strictly monogamous society, where monogamy is the big thing, and someone from a society where polygamy and monogamy are allowed, mm-hmm. I would suggest that there's more humanness, mm-hmm. that is, humanness to other individuals inside of a polygamous a society where polygamy is allowed. Mm-hmm. And we see that. I mean, if you compare societies, African societies, mm-hmm. to European societies where there was no polygamy, you see there's a big difference. One of the differences is, in modern times, that where we so stringently talk about monogamy, mm-hmm. we we have abuse of women, we have the whole sex industry, all these things that happen to women who don't happen to have the protection, quote unquote, of a man. You have the abandonment of children, you have all these things that are components of that monogamous system. And people say, oh, well, but we have monogamy. Whereas in a polygamous community, right? Not to say that you wouldn't have people who would engage in child abuse and all those things. Those are individual human traits. But you have a humanness to the children. In African societies, children had a very difficult time saying who their actual mothers are, or their fathers, right? Because linguistically, the language is set up in such ways that the people use a language that allows an expansiveness for uncles and brothers to share the relationship and responsibilities of brother. That's a more important component than any of this other stuff that people like to talk about at all.
One of the things that you talked about before was that you said that it's not natural for women. One of the reasons you thought polygamy was important or necessary, why it's something that we might be needed, is that you thought that it wasn't. You think that it's not good. Monogamy forces women to have to compete, and it's not natural for women to compete. It should be the man who competes for women. Would you like to comment more on that?
People. Okay. What I was trying to point out is that women decide the quality of the next generation, what traits will go on into the next generation. They also decide what habits will be there to refine the qualities that go into the next generation. All right, by the choices that they make with men. When you take a system like monogamy, which says that you find a soulmate of this person, and then after finding that person, I got mine, you have to get yours. Women become very competitive, and we see that in the world today. Women are very possessive of the men that they have. They don't want anyone around. Most men who get married don't have female friends. That's a no-no, because a woman, no matter who she is, the wives don't trust that. And what I'm suggesting is that we need to put women back in a position of power. In a position of power, as far as I'm concerned, and what nature has taught us, is that women should be in a position where they can observe the brothers with certain qualities, and as a result, make a selection at that point. And in doing so, actually push men to be better for the potential of perhaps polygamy or something like that, to be husbands. That's why, pretty much like in the animal kingdom, what happens. You have the males compete to present themselves as having the best genetic material, and as a result, the females choose to mate with that particular male at that time, and those qualities are passed on. So that's why.
Okay. One of the things you had spoke about, and you had talked about, you thought it was that you had an argument that you said about it had something to do with limiting competition, and you thought that monogamy was constructed because Europeans wanted to limit competition between.
I think that, well, more correctly, I think that monogamy was spread around the world as one of the psychological necessities of Europeans, because it allowed them to compete in the mating game, that is passing their genetic material from one generation to the next, and more efficiently when you compare them to the rest of the world. And what I mean by that is this: look, if you have men of color having greater access or ease to producing children, right? Which we've seen, you go around the world, we don't have all these issues or what have you. Then if you have Europeans, and I just use the term European Western, non-people of color going around the world at some point 2,000, 3,000 years ago, whatever the time may have been, and they met with other people, they would have realized that their ability to breed as effectively when mixing with other people doesn't necessarily give their genetic material right back to them as ours does, right? So as a result, if you establish monogamy, that psychology would say that it would make it even now. Now I have the potential to breed at an effective rate like these people do, and that's all throughout the world, right? So it's something that would have been an effective strategy. And you didn't have to have some conference of people saying, oh, let's do this because, we're racist or we're this or that. Nothing like that had to occur. It would have just been, it's just as, I often say, if you take my son, and he's a little kid, and I say to him, you know, we're going to have this race. And he says, okay. He says, look, I'll race you from here to, you know, some point. If you win, you can have something, whatever that might be, you know. And he says, okay. And we set up and we start the race. It would only be, you know, intelligent of my son to say, wait a minute, you're larger. I should have a head start.
Right.
And what I'm suggesting is that they establish monogamy as the only rule because it ostensibly gives them not only that equalizer, but that head start. You understand what I'm saying? Because if you look at the history of it, black people or people of color having large numbers of children have always been castigated in a negative way.
Right.
Always seen as negative. Whereas white people or people of non-color having large numbers of children have always been honored, you know. Even to this day, you know, the woman had 6 children and oh, you know, and all these people give gifts and they're all happy and blah. Well, what is that? You know, I think that it's a psychological thing that has them saying this is a benefit to us, which is it's also one of the reasons why I believe that they are diametrically opposed to abortion, because by and large, middle class white girls typically around the world have more children at a younger age like that, but they're aborting more. So as a result, you know, they say no, we'll take them as they come in effect.
Now you was some of the things one thing you had talked about was how in terms of struggling to be able to practice polygamy openly, you make some comparisons in terms of how the gay communities struggle for legislation. Would you comment on what you said about
Yeah,
that?
I think that an important thing is that, and let me first say that it's important that we stop talking about polygamy as this linear thing that is simply Mormon.
Right.
In America, there are more groups of people that practice polygamy who are non-Mormon than anything, all right? And every time you see polygamy being reported on television or in any form in the media, we're always talking about the Mormons. So thus the objections that you get to polygamy being legalized are objections which are a reflection of Mormon culture. The Mormons primarily deal with a patriarchal society, and as a result, the abuse of women, the pushing out of young boys, the marriage of young girls, and all this other kind of stuff are all particular components of the culture of fundamentalist Mormons. Some fundamentalist Mormons, because all of them we know don't engage in that capacity. But typically, when the media talks about polygamy and the effects of it, they will talk about Mormonism or celestial marriage or plural marriage or whatever the Mormons have deemed it, and polygamy, right? All in the same breath, not realizing that they're different groups, just as they are priests in the Catholic Church who have never engaged in any illicit activity with children or women or any of that stuff, and they kept the vow. There are those who have, and it's unfair to say that Catholic priests are, you know, abused children. Some of them have abused children, and that's the same thing with this. Polygamy is much broader, and I think that can clearly be seen. A magazine, February edition, February 2010 edition of National Geographic had on the cover polygamy in America, and the photo was a photo of some people who were Mormons, one man and his particular family, and the entire article talks about the Mormons and what they never talks about Muslims in this country practicing polygamy, never talks about groups of people, Christians who practice polygamy, never talks about, you know, other individuals who are engaged in polygamy, right? And that's the important thing. Now,
well, let me just say, one of the reasons I wanted to look at it in the African American community, because it's almost like when we talk about the black family, we never talk about it in the context of polygamy, and there are African American communities that practice it. But it's always, typically, we talk about the black community in terms of family, then it's typically the single welfare mom and all the dysfunction that goes on with that. So I agree with you.
Absolutely, and, you're right. And people spend a great deal of time engaging in that, describing, when you ask most people, look, I talk to a lot of people about polygamy, or about what's going on in the black community. And all of the issues that we have, the problems that we have in the black community, whether it be teen pregnancy, whether it be crime, whether it be the transmission of disease, whether it be, all of these things stem from not having intact families.
Exactly.
All right? The family is simply nothing more than a vehicle which allows you to transport one psychological set of instructions from one generation to the next. And if we don't have an intact system, you get what you put into it. All right? So you have beautiful children being born into the world, going into these crazy systems that on the other